Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you back with us today. I am Rosalyn Shahid, and we are continuing our series. This is day 4 of Literacy is Liberation, and today we're going to focus on abundant, culturally relevant reading, what that means, and how we can enact that practice as practitioners and thoughtful educators and supporters of young people. So today we're going to begin with a little bit of an introduction to my colleagues. Again, I'm Rosalyn Shahid. I'm one of the literacy consultants here at Wayne Risa, and my colleague Jeff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Austin. I'm a literacy consultant at Wayne Risa. I use he pronouns. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this. I think this is our 4th one in the series, so we're 4, 6 so far. So thanks for being here and making time on an August afternoon. We appreciate it.
Dr. Gabrion.
Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here with all of you. And if you've been here with us for the last 4 days, thank you so much. We're excited about continuing to learn. And if you're brand new to the series, we're excited to have you.
And last but not least, Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that all of you could join today, and ditto for everything that my colleagues said. So I hope you enjoy the session. Have a great one.
Thank you. And if you are a person who follows Twitter, we invite you to follow us on Twitter. You can find me at Pi5. That is spelled P-Y-E. My tweets are my own. And if you want tweets from our Wayne Risa team, you can follow our team at Wayne Risa, ELA. And if you want to tweet today about today's sessions, valuable information, or things that you just think should be shared with the world, please use hashtag Wayne Literacy. Again, I am so excited for this topic because this really positions and centers my work as a literacy consultant, as a mother of 2 children who I think are thriving readers, African-American, right? Trying to figure out ways to support them academically, socially, emotionally. So when they leave this space, when they leave the K-12 space, they are whole, right? And that is my goal, that every child, when they leave, they feel whole, they feel empowered, and they feel like they can articulate for themselves, they feel empowered, and we do that through our work with literacy. So first, we want to begin by acknowledging the land on which we stand. Wayne Risa stands is the ancestral land of several indigenous tribes, including the 3 fires, which were comprised of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. We stop to acknowledge the land and the indigenous people because we want to use this platform as a platform to heal. And we want to remind folks that indigenous people are here, they are thriving, and they deserve acknowledgement. So keeping that in mind, we want to begin with a principle from the Iroquois, and it is the 7th generation principle. And the belief really is beautiful. It gives us so much wisdom that all that we do, every decision that we make, should be thinking in terms of 7 generations, right? What the plans that we make are really connected to not just ourselves in present day, but our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren. So these decisions that we make today will live well beyond us. And so when we think about the work of literacy consultants, I believe this principle is very appropriate to bring forward with us. And so I ask that you bring that principle forward with you today as well. So here is the rationale for today's sessions. It really is very similar to what we've talked about throughout the series, right? We want to support teachers, educators in general, with really co-constructing culturally relevant literacy communities, really by using those MESA essential practices for grades 4 through 5 and grades 6 through 12. They really center and anchor our work. So we'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. We are also lifting up the good work of Dr. Kimberly Parker's Literacy is Liberation, and Dr. Parker will be with us soon. So there is a registration link that will be dropped before the end of the session. So we invite you to study along with us. Some of you may have already received a link to the ebook. If you were one of the first 25 participants to sign up and you have not received that link, please let us know and we will make sure to get it to you. And last but not least, we want to talk about the intersections, right, of Dr. Parker's work and the Essentials work, and how we can use both frameworks to really repair and prevent harm to students as readers and writers, to honor and value students and their families, to really zoom in and focus on what community building means, right? In ways that develop abundant opportunities for culturally relevant reading, culturally relevant writing, culturally relevant stances as just part of what we do. So when we think about literacy as our ELA team, we think about it in these ways. We're thinking that literacy is an action word. It is not something that you have, it is something that you do, right? And so we're also thinking a lot about this idea of humanizing spaces when we think about literacy. And that question was posed to me recently. So what do we mean by humanizing? What we mean by humanizing is that every task should make students feel more whole. It should make them feel more connected to our lessons. It should make them feel more empowered. And that's what we mean by humanizing literacy experiences, right? And we know those experiences, we can feel it in our souls when those experiences aren't going that way for students. And so we want to bring those to the forefront so we can work to eradicate practices that do not support and heal students. We know that literacy is also liberatory. Frederick Douglass says, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. We believe that. That is our stance. And we also believe that literacy is ever evolving, right? So many of the practices that we were taught as students ourselves, or even maybe practiced as newer teachers, those practices may need to be rethought, right? They may need to evolve, right? To support the students that we have in front of us today. So that is our stance, and that is the way that we will engage today, thinking of those things. So just to recap, I'm going to invite my colleagues just for 30 seconds to talk a little bit about the sessions that they led. We'll start with my colleague, Jeff Austin, to recap day one, and then we'll follow up with Jennifer Snapp, and then I will also talk a little bit about my session. So Jeff, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So last Tuesday, we kicked off this series by talking about identity affirming classrooms and identity affirming spaces. And we talked a little bit about expanding our definitions of literacy. We talked about what it means to be liberated in a literacy space. And the takeaway, or one of the takeaways, I guess, is that really where literacy and liberation come together is where students are honored and valued. So that means honoring their funds of knowledge, their ways of knowing, and allowing them to show up in your spaces as their fullest selves and find a lot of great success there. So that was day one. I'll turn it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit about day two.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So yes, I did day two, and we talked about culturally relevant pedagogy, which basically is just, again, making sure that our students have academic success, that we are setting high expectations for them that are measurable, and I should say attainable for them. Also, we talked about cultural competence, making sure that we as educators understand who our students are by talking to them about their cultural and their individual lives, their identities, and then being aware of our social, political, or critical consciousness, making sure that our students are able to critically analyze texts and use their intellect and criticality in doing so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And on day three, I built upon much of the work of my colleagues, and we zoomed in on this idea of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. That idea that comes from Rudine Sims Bishop. And we talked about this idea of asset mapping and liberation from nostalgia, right? So why are we selecting some of the texts that we're selecting? Are they really good for the students that we have before us today, or are they just books that we personally enjoy, right? So that was our conversation. So we're going to continue down that path. And before we move into it, here are our working agreements. So I'll give you a moment to look over those. And today I'm really going to focus on taking a learner's stance. We believe that we grow from one another, right? Strong is what we make each other. So I'm happy to listen to your comments. You all feed me your energy. So please, I want for this to be a collaborative space where we are sharing ideas and supporting one another. Here is today's agenda. We're going to continue thinking about that nurturing, a love of reading. We're going to continue thinking about asset mapping, but through the lens of selecting books. We'll have some breakouts and a closing reflection. So our first breakout room will be based on this short clip from Cornelius Minor, who I love, Mr. Minor, and Penny Kittle, one of my favorite authors as well. And so I just want you to kind of listen into this clip. And as you're listening, think about what affirms how you define pro-kid. Mr. Minor will lift that term. So listen for that piece and how does it support you in defining it? And what does it invite you to continue to grow within during this 2022-23 school year? So I'll give you a listen. I think it's about maybe 3 minutes in total. If you can't hear, please just let us know.
You know, and I think one of the things I think a lot about is what it means to be pro-kid. You know, a lot of people ask me, Cornelius, what are your politics? And one of the things I often say is I'm radically pro-kid, you know, that it is our job as educators to create opportunities for kids. And, you know, and eventually, of course, to teach them to create opportunities for themselves. And as such, anything that stands in the way of opportunity is my enemy. And so it's just been really, really easy to be on the side of kids. You know, does this thing extend opportunity for more children? If it does, I'm with it. If it doesn't, I can fix it.
Well, and I think part of what you said there was true for me as well, which is once I started resisting and I was, you know, I'm here for kids, I'm not here for my colleagues, I'm sorry they're unhappy. You know, I was just really enforcing with the people that were above me that you hired me to reach them, and if this is preventing that, then why are you saying I have to comply? But once I was able to do it, you get stronger each time you do it. Absolutely. And you're able to say, okay, so if you really truly think Huck Finn is no child can leave, I'd hear these statements all the time, you know, leaving 10th grade without having read it. If that's really the hill you die on, then we need to sit down and talk about why that's true. Yes. Because it's deeper than just a book, a text. Exactly. And so if it is causing, as it did in my room, a whole widespread group of kids to refuse to read it, then why am I trapped by only that text? Absolutely. Like what are the objectives and ideas that are way above that? And engagement with literacy.
Well, at a certain point in our profession, we know that teaching started, teaching in the United States for many groups of people was a form of colonization. And I think it's important to remember that, because when we establish gatekeeping rituals like you must read Huck Finn before you move on, those are remnants of our original colonization, our original colonial mindset. And so this idea that even though I see this thing being bad for children, like I will enforce it because that's what the people a generation before me did, you know? And so it's that uncritical look at our own work, I think, that makes so many of us complicit in the marginalization of children.
Okay, so just take a moment to think of one or two ideas that you think are worth sharing in your smaller group of 2 to 3. And we'll move you into that group to have that conversation. What affirms your ideas or how you are thinking about this idea of pro-kid, and what invites you to grow.
All right. In just a second, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. If you have any trouble getting to your breakout room, just let us know. How long are they going to be there?
Let's give them 4 minutes.
All right. So 4 minutes. We'll see you back here. We'll see you back here then.
Okay, I think everyone is back. I would love to hear just a little bit of what you discussed. If anyone would like to volunteer to share a takeaway.
A takeaway for what we talked about in my group was basically we're here for the students, and so we need to listen to what they want and what's important for them. Like, it's our job to serve them.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Christy. Would anyone else like to share?
Sure, I can share. Sorry, my camera isn't really working. We were talking a little bit in my group about the use of short text to get around obstacles to being pro-kid. So like if you want to replace Huck Finn, you might come up against a funding obstacle to buy a whole set of new books. But a short text, short story, short articles can be a nice way to get through some of those obstacles.
That's beautifully stated. And I love that you are thinking about the systems work, right? How we as educators need to be supportive in those ways as well, and helping administrators think through those pieces and to, you know, be resources for the kids. And my colleagues, last but not least, if anyone would like to add.
I was just thinking about the structural piece, and you know, we're all working within in systems that may have funding issues, or it may be hard to get books, or things take a long time to get approved. You know, this is another great use of student choice, I think, to form maybe book clubs or lit circles so that you can have students reading you know, maybe 5 students reading a book, and it's easier to get 5 copies of something than, you know, 150 copies of something. So it like student choice has all these benefits, but I think there are some other systems benefits there too. So just echoing what Jonathan said, and just kind of thinking about it in a slightly different way.
Yes, thank you for adding that. So the next slide really kind of leans back into that idea of the triangle of achievement. How do we support kids in robust ways? And when looking at the work of Gary Howard, right, he says he uses this triangle and he thinks about each of the vertices. And he says, how well do I know myself in relationship to my students, right? I think that's what Christy lifted, right? What is it that students really need from us? How can we support them to help them thrive, right? Am I holding on to text because I have a relationship with this text, right? How well do I know myself in relationship to my students? And how well do I know myself in relationship to my practice, right? So a lot of the culturally responsive work that we do is considered inside out work. So we're always bringing it back to self. What is my relationship with the text that I don't want to provide another opportunity for that piece? So that's something that we have to think about as educators. And I love this graphic because it visually supports all the dimensions that we're constantly need to think about. It helps with self-reflection, and it also invites us into thinking in through these three dimensions: self, knowing yourself, knowing your students, and knowing your practice. So Cornelius Minor, just building on Mr. Minor and his work, he really advises us. He says content and pedagogy should be thought about in these very distinct ways. You're asking, are the materials that I'm using representative of the world that we live in? Do they contribute respectfully to various groups of people? It's important to consider issues around race and gender and ability, geography, right? In the resources, so the content is one thing, but how do I share this information with students? Are the tasks robust? Are those tasks engaging? So using inclusive, diverse materials alone does not support or doesn't progress at the rate that we would like it to progress if we're still using practices that deny access to certain groups of students. So thinking about that multimodal way, that's what Jonathan lifted earlier, right? Like, how can I bring in these ideas with shorter text, right? That's an access point, right? How can I think about different ways to bring in information in terms of printed, multimodal, polyvocal pieces into the classroom, and different, just multiple ways that kids can express their knowing and understanding. So one of the ways that we're thinking about this is through the essentials documents. These documents are dating back to 2015. And really, the state of Michigan has created a suite of documents to support what they consider are essential practices for literacy. So they go from birth all the way through grade 12. There is an essential practice for leaders. There is an essential practice guide for coaching. There is an essential practice guide for 6 through 12, 4 through 5, K through 3, and pre-kindergarten. We're actually going to focus today, since this is a session focused on secondary learners, we're going to zoom in on this 4 through 5 instructional literacy practices, and the 6 through 12 instructional literacy practices. The beautiful thing about these practices is that they really are complementary to one another. And so it provides an opportunity for the entire state to have a similar stance about what we mean by good instructional practices in our state, right? So we're able to have both a vertical conversation from starting at birth, right, all the way through grade 12, but we're also able with the 6 through 12 disciplinary literacy to have a horizontal conversation across content. And that's really what I want to share with you today. So I am one that loves history. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the essential documents for grades 6 through 12, the disciplinary literacy documents. And so it started with this student, Jamaria Hall. I want to center Jamaria because when we talk about civically engaged classroom, and when we talk about, well, what is it? Why do we say that literacy should be actionable and humanizing? It is because Jamaria, as a high school student, along with his classmates, decided that something was amiss, that he and his classmates were not given adequate literacy skills. So they decided as seniors and juniors to sue the state of Michigan. You may remember this as the right to literacy case. Initially, that lawsuit was denied by the state of Michigan, saying there is no fundamental right to literacy. And it wasn't until that started in 2016, and it wasn't until 2020 under Governor Whitmer that she said with the Supreme Court, she agreed with the Supreme Court of Michigan that Jamaria and his friends were correct, that yes, students do deserve a right to literacy. It is a civil right. And so from Jamaria and that testimony, Dr. Elizabeth Moji was one of the, she testified and as an expert witness, and what she shared is that if we want students to be literate, fully literate, we need to consider these 10 practices, right? So really the entire suite of documents that you saw previously is an outgrowth of student activism, of students understanding that something was amiss, of students standing up for their rights, right? We have completely shifted the ways that we think about literacy in our state. And we thank you, Jamaria Hall, and we want to encourage students to continue to stand up for their rights. So with that, we want to think about how we can make curriculum more inclusive, to invite students into this conversation. So we want to think about ways that we can really develop socially just classrooms. And so I'm going to give you some time to kind of look through these documents. And before I do that, just want to share with you some of the distinctions here between basic literacy, and that's oftentimes what the courts decided, that students had a right to a basic literacy. But when we look at basic literacy as defined by literacy experts, basic literacy simply focuses on generic basic skills of literacy. For example, decoding, grammar conventions, basic facts and computation, looking up vocabulary words, right? Basic literacy is not what Jamaria Hall or his classmates were fighting for. They were fighting for what we consider disciplinary literacy. They wanted access to instruction that provided them a more robust understanding of content, to have access to college. We know for sure when students have strong reading skills, it provides them greater access to college, to work, to career, right? So when we think about disciplinary literacy, which anchors our essential practices, it frames instruction for students to address authentic questions about their communities and their individual lives. It prioritizes the work of the disciplines. It values the complexities of knowledge systems, and it attends very explicitly to issues of equity, power, and justice. So these are, this is an example. There are 10 practices. I've only pulled out 2 today. One is around this idea of diverse text from the 6 through 12 document. And we also have a similar essential in the 4-5 document. It says abundant and diverse reading materials, including digital text and opportunities to read in the classroom. So in both documents, you see that there is a call for diverse text to be in the hands of students. It is an access point. And without it, we cannot be culturally competent, right? The second piece that I pulled out is this idea of community networking. So the idea in the 612 Essentials is that we need to network within our communities in order to tap the available funds of knowledge in supporting and developing students' content, knowledge, and identities. That goes back directly to the asset mapping that we did a couple of days ago around going into the communities, figuring out where those resources are, figuring out how students, what knowledge bases do students already come to our classes with, and how we can leverage those pieces. That is not something nice to do. According to Dr. Moji and the research team, that is an essential practice. In order for students to be culturally competent, socially competent, college and career ready, this needs to be explicitly embedded into our work. The same is true for our 4-5 babies, right? In order for them to be prepared to enter secondary spaces, they too need to have opportunities for their families to collaborate and promote literacy. So we need to be thinking about these things, right? So we know that these documents are very dense. So we just want to give you a little sampling of the documents, right? Because what we're proposing to you, we're saying, if you choose to design your class, anchoring your class, your instruction with these practices, you are much, much closer to supporting students and how we're defining literacy in humanizing ways, right? In ways that empower and in ways that support what Jamaria Hall and his classmates were advocating for. So on this slide, you'll see a QR code. It's also in our Padlet, and it will link you to those documents. I'm going to come out so you can see the documents. So you all should be able to get to the Padlet now. And depending upon your grade level that you're focused in on, you can either choose to take a look at practice, the essential practices for grade 4 and 5, or the essential practices for grades 6 through 12. So let me just click on 4 through 5. If you are selecting 4 through 5, this essential practice, I would like for you to take a look at the practices that focus explicitly on diverse text which is practice number 8. And there is a bullet point for each of these practices. Now, although it's been synthesized into a few bullet points here, there is so much research behind each of these bulleted points. So I want to provide you an opportunity to kind of read through each bulleted point, and then we'll come back and have a conversation around that. And if time permits, you can also read around what do they mean by collaboration with families and promoting literacy. So that is your task if you are a teacher who wants to look at grades 4 and 5. If you are interested in the essential practices document for grades 6 through 12, it's a little bit more complicated here, but our colleagues have done such a great job in helping us to stay organized. So each tab here takes you to the content. So there's an English language arts tab, mathematics tab, social studies, and science. And you'll see the same 10 practices for each of the tabs. I'm just going to click on English language arts. And this is what I meant earlier by that horizontal. So you'll see the same 10 essentials. So diverse text and abundant reading opportunities. What does that mean for grades 6 through 12? You can read across. What does that mean in ELA? What does it mean in math? What does it mean in science? Or you can just stay in ELA. So this number 2, and then scroll down to number 10. Oh, I'm sorry, number 9, community networking to tap into available funds of knowledge. So just kind of peruse those 2. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes to peruse those pieces. And then we'll come back and move you into groups. We can move them into groups. And we can just have a conversation across. So there will be 2 groups, a 4-5 group and a 6-12 group. So Jeff, if you want to move people into those groups, they'll get a chance. I'm not sure if we're able. If we're not, we can just move them back to their original groups.
So you should be able to, once I hit open room, choose your breakout room. And as Roz said, there'll be one for grades 4 and 5 and one for grades 6 and 12. Choose the one that's best suited for your context. There you go. Be able to click join. If you can't, let us know. Then we can do some moving.
Can I just start off to say thank you to all my breakout members. Sorry, thank you for being there.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming back. I think we have everyone back. Perfect. So just reactions. Were people familiar with the documents or just revisiting, or was it something completely new? I would love to hear any of your conversation that you want to share.
So I will say, for me personally, I am a middle school ELA teacher, and I am very familiar with CCCS, but I don't think I've actually ever seen this document. It's amazing. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, I'm so happy to hear you say that, Madeline, because this is the work that we do. And when we're all rowing in the same direction as a state, it gives us such a momentum, right? And so we're not guessing. Yes, the standards certainly do that work. But I think this additional layer in historicizing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, where do these standards come from? They come out of social justice work, right? That is what grounded the essential practices. And I think having it contextualized that way also supports the verb that we attend to these pieces. So yes, thank you so much.
And a lot of it I do already incorporate in my classroom, but I've just never seen this document.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Anyone else like to share?
I want to share that I don't have to do such intense reading during the summer as much as I have been, because you've taken this huge, especially Snapped from the beginning, which I've read, and I tried to, break it down for the students, and it's like, where do I break it down? And so you've taken the burden of breaking it down for me and applied it, and I appreciate that tremendously, along with some of the other reading, because I'm a really, I'm a bookworm. And that's what I do in my summers. I spend my summers reading and how can I apply the culturally responsive reading pieces to my students. I didn't notice, but do you have like other cultures? Like I had Korean students and Hispanics, and then also, multicultural students, like by, Spanish, half American, Spanish, Caucasian. Do you have readings on that order as well? I didn't look all the way through, and I'll be quiet.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to go back. I think I went too far with my slides. I apologize. So really, I want to start here with Dr. Muhammad's wise words. She says, teachers must think of text as the core and center of their teaching. So when we select text, we need to do that with great intentionality. So yes, we want to be inclusive, but we also want to be strategic in the kinds of text that we're offering. And so when we select those texts, I think of it in three ways, right? Just building upon what the essential document says. Does this provide an entry point, right? We were thinking about those mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I always think we are the sliding glass doors. That is the metaphor of the teacher. That is us, right? And how do these texts help kids get smarter, right? How do these texts support with students understanding the world around them, around compelling issues? So one entry point text or genre are graphic novels. You can find a graphic novel of basically about any topic. And the beauty of graphic novels is that the complexity of the words are supported by those visual images. And there is new brain research that says when those things are paired, it actually supports comprehension, particularly for students who might be struggling with, getting up to their reading proficiency, the standardized reading proficiency. I'm putting up air quotes, right? So it just really is a support for them. And it looks very much like things that they love, which are comic books, right? So this one is one that I love. This is a series, March, and it's written by the late John Lewis. So it really chronicles his life. It's just beautifully illustrated, beautifully written, and it's set obviously in a historical context. So it does a few things. George Takei, They Called Us Enemy, another beautiful, beautiful text that talks about, the concentration camps right here in America when against the Japanese internment camps, right? So that is another example of a graphic novel that opens up an opportunity to learn about American history, to humanize folks and think about what can we learn from these historical pieces, and where do we see some of these things happening modern day during our COVID-19 pandemic, right? We know that there was attack against Asian Americans, right? So these kinds of texts just definitely support. I won't go through all. We do have some resources around STAMP, and I can share those with you as well. and some of the other texts listed. What I wanted to get to was this idea of text sets. So you'll see a text set using this QR code. And I just want you to think about Harriet Tubman for a moment. This is a beautiful picture. There are so few pictures of Harriet Tubman. I think there are maybe 4 that I've seen. So this is one when she was much younger. And according to historical records, Harriet Tubman, it is believed that Harriet Tubman would never learn to read and write in the traditional ways. So my question to students with this text set that I'll show you in a moment would be, do you agree with this statement? Using those historical texts, how are you defining literacy, right? And so I'm going to show you, you can also look at it on your own. Let's see here. But here is a curation of resources that all focus on Harriet Tubman. There are interviews with the society that keeps her records, which is, I love this interview with Sunday Morning. There's an interactive timeline. There's picture books and artifacts from the National Archive. There are, TED Talks. There is a connection to chain migration. This is from the 1619 Project. There are so many different modalities, right? And so my position is, and I hope that students will walk away with something like this, is that Harriet Tubman was certainly literate. She was certainly literate. She was able to understand that the North Star is the brightest star in the constellation. And because she had that knowledge, right, she was able to read latitude and longitudinal points to tell direction. She was certainly literate, right? And she was able to listen to songs for metaphor to determine when would it be appropriate to come into spaces, right? When would it be appropriate to make those escapes? This is all metaphor, right? She was certainly literate. She had a photographic memory. Although Tubman could not technically read or write down anything, she was a spy. So she committed everything to memory. So she could guide ships towards strategic points near the shore where fleeing slaves were waiting and Confederate property could be destroyed, all while leading steamers away from known torpedoes. She was certainly literate. And so these are the kinds of texts, these are the kinds of questions that I would pose to students. She was an educator and an entrepreneur. She raised money to build schools for newly freed people during the Reconstruction. She also taught recently freed women to provide goods and services to the Union Army for pay. She also purchased land and owned property. She ran a farm and built a home for the ill and the elderly on her land. She was certainly literate. How are we defining literacy, right? How are we lifting our students? If Harriet Tubman was a student in your class today and she had taken her NWEA and it said that she could not read, are we accurate? How are we lifting her funds of knowledge, right? Because there are Harriet Tubman sitting in our classrooms right now. So we use these text sets, right, to provide access and opportunities for students to think about text in the traditional ways, to expand their knowledge around social issues, world issues, and to also expand how they're thinking about literacy, right, beyond the printed word. So again, I want to reiterate that here are some additional spaces for you to find beautiful text to bring into your classrooms. If you are on Twitter, I encourage you to follow these spaces as well as Wayne Risa, ELA. On Voices, Disrupt Text, We Need Diverse Books, Diversity Jedi. So those are some spaces to find. Want to skip that. And here are some considerations for you if you are bringing in these text sets into your classrooms. This comes from the textbook Civically Engaged Classrooms. How are my students experiencing the event, issue, or history? We want to be sensitive to that. Will some of my students feel vulnerable or disempowered based on the text that I'm using in my classroom? Is there a way to shift the study so that it is more empowering to students? And are the texts written by members of the community being studied? That's a huge piece. That's what Dr. Reese lifted for us on Tuesday when she talked about language, the language that's being used in certain texts. And are my students' lives affected by this topic in deeply relevant ways? So we want to liberate ourselves from nostalgia. Here are some additional pieces. And last but not least, we want to invite you to join us. We have a dynamic lineup of facilitators and literacy experts coming, but more importantly, right, than seeing those literacy experts, we want to build community with you. So I want to invite you to also join our equity-based disciplinary literacies network. You are the antidote. We can read all of these books, they're beautiful, but it's you. So I want to give Jeff a moment to talk about the equity-based literacies network and how you can sign up.
Yeah, Laura has just put a couple of s'mores in the chat. So there's one s'more for the Equity Leaders series, and you'd be lucky to hear from the people that are coming for this Equity Leaders series in a lifetime, but you could hear from all of them in 1 year, which is pretty incredible. And then she's also got a link to this equity-based disciplinary literacies network. Roz has done a beautiful job today, and a beautiful job in an article she's just published, talking about the idea that the disciplinary literacy essentials are rooted in social justice activism by students. That's how they came about. And without Jamaria Hall and his classmates, we would have never had them. So we believe there is a way and a necessity to implement those practices in very culturally responsive, culturally sustaining ways. That's our goal. And we want to help you do that. And we want you to help us do that in community together. So using the s'more, click the link. It'll take you right to the registration page. The meetings are 1 hour a month. They're one time for 1 hour a month. We've got 8 meetings. So it's 8 hours over the school year. We know that your plates are full. We know that you're busy. We know your workload's just intense. But we do want to give you a space for learning and community building. And we want to get to know you and your work better as well. So definitely join us. I think it's going to be really, really great and a good use of your 1 hour a month. We promise you that. We do not take teacher time for granted.
And speaking of time, we're right on time. So we thank you. If you have not already signed in, make sure you do that. This course, you can receive sketch credit. We know we need those credits to maintain our certification. So don't let even 1 hour go past. I remember one year I was, I don't know, like 5 hours. Sure, so don't give up even 1 hour. So please go ahead, and we thank you. We appreciate you. Enjoy this beautiful day. It is absolutely gorgeous outside. So go outside and enjoy your families. We thank you.